Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Hi everybody, welcome to Soul and Survival podcast. Welcome Louise.
Hi Grant, how are you going today?
Not too bad, it's very foggy and a little cooler. We were 37 degrees Celsius, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's pretty close to about 100, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
yesterday.
it's close. Yeah.
So it's nice to have a bit of a cool change. So
definitely.
Last time was easy for me because you did I think it was...
Oh, no, that's not last time. You're out of order.
Am I?
Yeah,
okay,
don't worry
all
about
right,
that.
Wherever it is.
Last time we actually spoke about trauma and health effects, Gabor Mate, childhood development and trauma, hyperactivity, autoimmune, different things like that. And we were talking before about the type of audience that we don't 100% know who our audience is, but we get a fair bit of feedback, and thank you for that. But we suspect that a percentage... definitely patients who just want to learn a bit more about what you're doing because they are patients of yours and they like hearing what you've got to say. There's definitely a percentage that are already HFA practitioners that pick up little tips and it validates what they're doing. And I think for anyone who's been brave enough to step out and become a HFA practitioner, it's nice to get the validation of the intelligence of the system. And then there's this smaller group that I know because they've written to us, or some of them have, that are listening thinking, hey, I might like to do this, and they're kind of checking it out, which is understandable because we know how many different systems and methods there are within homeopathy and how much both money and time you have to sink into a method. I'll go off on a little tangent. Sorry, my brain's going here. But I remember we went to a seminar, probably well over a decade ago, up in Queensland, and we were talking to someone there who's been in homeopathy for around 20 years. And he was saying to us, wow, what you've done is so amazing. It's so incredible, really impressed, da-da-da-da. But, he said, I've invested more than 10 years into the particular method he had chosen to invest into. And he said, I want to see it pay off. I just feel I can't let it go now, not after 10 years. And that's really difficult for people within our profession. But I would like to say, and this is, again, a conversation in the last week with a homeopath of many years that just had a chat with me. And she said, I know there's something in your method. I've read and listened to you on and off over the years. But, the expense and so forth. And I said, well, it's not that much. We've tried to really trim it down. 50 classes, about 40 hours, and about 1,500 Australian dollars, which I think is about $1,000 US. And she said, oh, is that all? And I said, yeah, it's still a fair bit, obviously, a bit of time and a bit of money. But she said, and what do I get? And I said, well, you'll get to be really good at being a homeopath, I'll tell you that. We designed it for that reason. So bearing that in mind, with that type of audience, I thought a really good topic
would... you should also talk about what I've been out of the loop for ages. What's a price comparison? What are we giving for $1,000 US?
Okay, well that's a good question because one of the things that's a little bit different with our course is our whole focus is on being clinically successful. And what that's meant for us is that I don't know how many people out there know. If you're a homeopath, a student or a practitioner, you will know. But a lot of people want to study homeopathy. It's a topic that really interests them. And what they don't realise is the current courses, rightly so, I will say, are at 2,000 to 4,000 hours, with, 500 to 1,000 hours clinical kind of sitting in with another homeopath, which is quite difficult in itself to achieve. They're really long courses. There's a lot of depth to them. There's a fair bit of history, but the main focus is on remedy pictures, remedy keynotes. Now, for anyone that's been listening to us, that's not something we subscribe to anymore. We did learn it, but we don't do that anymore because HFA has taken us away from that. So what?
I think a lot of them still do the personality profiles too. It's not just keynotes.
Yeah, they do both. I mean, and it fills out the course.
I actually think keynotes are more successful than personality
Yeah,
profile.
well, that's a good point. I think the thing of it is when you're bearing in mind you need to learn at least 100, maybe 150 remedies at some level from fairly deep to just surface. It's a lot of information. But with HFA, what we do is we focus on repertorising. And so what that means is, apart from the name of the remedy and knowing what miasmatic group it belongs to, if we've happened to allocate it, and we've allocated most of the polycrests, it's about how to find it. You don't have to know it. I think we said this earlier on. If a remedy has 20 to 30,000 different indications, you can't learn it. It's too much. And if you're only learning 50 or 100, you're probably not learning the ones that are pertinent to the patient sitting in front of you. So we've kind of bypassed all of that, but we took it further. So what I mean by that is Grant, you did your original long form of the HFA course in 2010 and 2011. Which is quite, I think you did 21 classes and they were really long. They were well over 2 hours and there was a lot of information in there. And then later on, 10 years later, we decided perhaps we could make it shorter, more succinct, and like everyone around the world, we had a little bit of time during lockdown. So I took it on myself with a company in the US and one of their workers who became my student to see how quickly we could write and teach HFA to successful level. Well, that turned out to be in 40 classes, around 35 hours, which is really impressive and proven. We've taken people through it, people who are just newly graduated or not even finished their current courses. They come out and they go, wow, I know what to do, and off they go. And then we went one step further and we did this backwards, I suppose, but we wrote 10 classes called the Introduction to Homeopathy and HFA, which is just like all the basics, all the classical basics, incorporating HFA as a starting point. And that was just really for people who had not even done homeopathy. We've even taught people who have not even done homeopathy how to do homeopathy at a clinical level. I'm really proud of that. But that 10 classes has also become some people jumped it, and I felt that we assumed that every course in the world had the same classical kind of foundations, but that's actually not turned out to be true.
Actually, we should have. I'm going to point the finger here because you actually should have known that because we made that mistake when we first started lecturing. Remember when we I don't know when we first started lecturing.
Oh, I can tell you. I got a memory for years.
Okay.
I'm the numbers person.
Yeah.
We did our first. You did your first lecture in Melbourne in 2002. That's when someone said, "Oh, have you got a book?" And you went, "No, but I can write one." And off you went, writing your first book, which was quite challenging, doing everything else as well. But you did it. That came out in 2003, and we did Sydney and Adelaide in 2003, and then we went to New Zealand and did more of Australia in 2004, and then we ended up going what we call overseas, although I suppose New Zealand's technically overseas. But we did, we went to the US in 2006, and we went to Russia, and that was really interesting. And that came out of Sydney, remember? Remember what happened there? That was kind of a story, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Do you want to recall?
No, because I don't remember it that well.
You're saying you remember, you don't remember.
No, I remember the Russian doctor who came to us.
Yeah, I can't even remember her name, but she wrote to us a few years later. She just turned up at this Sydney seminar, which was your seminar. She just turned up with her translator. She didn't speak English. And she really just wanted to promote her own book, right, which is fair enough. So she thought, oh, this is an audience, I'll turn up.
Well, she asked me whether or not I would give her some time to be able to speak to her.
And you kindly said, of course. So she gave a little 10 or 15-minute talk via her translator on her own book. And so, you did a little presentation, gave her your book. And, she kindly said, oh, it would be lovely to see you in Russia. And we kind of nodded and smiled and went, oh, yeah, sure, And then about 6 months later, we were contacted by one of her colleagues who was who ran an institute in Moscow, and he was a
Valerie.
Yeah, I can't remember his surname, and he was a neurosurgeon. He said he really liked your work.
He was good. He was a good guy, and I liked it. He and his wife were really hospitable.
Oh, they were lovely. Very nice. Yeah, and they translated Appearance and Circumstance into Russian. Then they did homeopathic facial analysis. Then they did Soul and Survival. So there you go. That's in Russian. And we went back 3 times. It was great, wasn't it? So that was the decade of, going to different places in Europe. We went to Thailand, India, Canada, the US, all around Australia, New Zealand a couple of times. Like it was really great, actually, but tiring because our kids weren't fully grown by then, and it was a big deal packing up everything and going on these long haul flights and all. So I think about 2012 or so, about 2010, we did go back a couple more times. But
the point, though,
what's the point?
Is that because you reckon I go off.
I can ramble. It's true.
But no, the point that I was trying to make was that I learnt then. that you can't assume too much prior knowledge. Right?
Yeah.
That's the point that I was getting at.
Right.
I mean, it was the point that I was trying to make is that the course that we did and then the course later on that we taught, I now realise was pretty darn advanced by comparison to some.
Yeah.
And that there was a degree of knowledge that we just assumed would be, like when you're doing a typical uni course, right? You're just doing the undergraduate. Well, the undergraduate is a little, it's a bit more, it's uniformed in what you do. The difference with homeopathy is that it was done through a lot of private colleges. Now, that can be a good and a bad thing, but when it's at its best, it's better than any kind of uniformed.
Because it allows for independent thought.
Yeah. Look, the syllabus it is better than any other just uniform syllabus, and it can really teach some really crash hot people. However, if it isn't up to scratch, it often is not up to scratch by a long way.
And really strange, I think this focus always on materia medica, which we learned that way too. So it was quite commonplace in the 70s, 80s and 90s, and I believe still is. But, when you get a student, great people, they've done a full course, they've been in clinic, they're doing their best but struggling a little, but they don't really know how to find a rubric. They haven't really been taught. And one of the big ones is case management.
Yeah. Well, case management is something that we've developed along the way. Now, not saying that we had a clean slate. I mean, there were lots of different theories regarding case management when we first came in to practice. But we've modified both the case management and the philosophy around case management for it to make absolute perfect sense, and for practitioner and patient alike, they can begin to understand. It's just putting it into an energetic model. The biggest problem that homeopathy had for many, many years, I think, is that it had a foot in the camp of energy medicine and a foot in the camp of
conventional medicine.
Yeah,
definitely.
Mainly because conventional medicos were the primary homeopaths who were writing the original books. So they're sort of seeing things through one eye on the mystical and one eye on the pragmatic. And it was a real big revelation for me to sort of just understand homeopathy as entirely energetic, but also understand that the philosophy wasn't wrapped around the energetic. This is where you talk about miasms, infection, etc., leaving scars. All this sort of stuff is all that sort of leftover medical stuff, because Hahnemann was a medico. He brought everything back into that sort of level. Now, that's not to say that they don't have a contribution, but what I'm saying is if you really want to understand homeopathy properly, you start with an energy medicine, you see how it reacts, and then you build your philosophy around that. But it's got to be an energetic philosophy.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is if you go to those two different camps, one being, the conventional medical model, I have this pathology, what is the best remedy? It's just a ridiculous thing to state in homeopathic terms. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, but it's all the way. If you look at books like through Boracay, all these some of these sort of turn of the century,
well, they had it, yeah.
It was everywhere.
They push it, yeah.
This is
but it's not homeopathic.
Lycopodium is a great remedy for, the pious patches of the stomach, or, this is really good remedy for the white blood cells, or this is a really good remedy. And a lot of... And when we went to, I found when we went to India too, that there was still a fair bit of that around.
I think there is anywhere where the training has a strong medical base. And the medical base is really excellent for the medical sciences, but, it's not so good for when you're, it's okay. It's perfectly fine. We've just got a little diversion here. No worries.
It's all right.
No, I'm just trying to say, well, my point was, I was just saying that there's these two extreme branches. So you've got this real medical model on one hand, and then right down the other end, you've got this really spiritual model, and they're really, really different. And where HFA, I think, is fascinating is it's sort of fallen in the middle in that it's totally energetic, so you think it's more on the spiritual end of things, but there's a pragmatic nature to the way you look at the energy. And I think that's what grounds it and makes it special and quite easy to learn as well.
Well, it's not an art, okay? It's not it's not... Who's that artist I really like at the moment? They always put his art to all of the
is that
music.
Mari?
Nagani.
And
Nagani. Yeah, I really... Yeah, anyway.
Impressionist sort of work.
Impressionist stuff. I really like that sort of stuff. But anyway, the point is that it's not a piece of art, right? Homeopathy is there to act as a medicine. It's just that what we're doing is that we're doing it in a different format, but it's a valid format where it doesn't incorporate.
You're talking about HFA, homeopathy,
or just homeopathy.
Okay.
Is that you need to understand what homeopathy is, and homeopathy is essentially a medicine that changes over the vital force or the disturbed vital force. That's so disturbed of a patient to the point where it now filters down and pathology takes place. And so what we're trying to do is, rather than go down the conventional model of modifying the inflammation or trying to alleviate the pathology or whatever it may be, what we're trying to do is go to its fountain source, and we're trying to re-alter it there.
Which is aberrant energy is the fountain source, yeah?
Yeah. And so you can see there that, and this is certainly not to knock every Indian homeopath. There are fantastic Indian homeopaths that we met. But there are some that are so entrenched into the medical model that, I can't see it working that well. And the other one is that in the West, and often particularly in Europe, and, here comes a bit of email, but they're so out there. They're so left field. Again, I find it difficult to understand that, not that you wouldn't get any results, but you've got to be getting consistency.
We would like to be getting consistency. And, we've looked we learn.
Because consistency is the key, isn't it? It's not about a lucky hit, you know. I mean, the prestige of a person who lives just up the hill can be something that they could touch you with their forefinger on your third eye position, and suddenly you do feel cured, and perhaps you might even be. But could he do it over and over and over again? Now, that's the question. It's not whether or not you've got a successful case. It's whether or not, say, in a clinic like ours where we get 40 people or something through all in a row, whether or not the vast majority of those 40 every week are getting better, right? And that's the question. It's
and you'll never get everybody, and I've got to reiterate this because that's just, I mean, even in conventional medicine, you never get everybody. There's people that don't fit the model left, right and centre. But you've got to be realistic with your stats. What is a success? And we look at people's symptoms. That's the thing. It's their symptoms have to improve and their energy and their outlook, the whole thing coming along together. But the symptoms are the core, and we use the symptoms to take the case. We use the symptoms to repertorise. We use the symptoms to case management to determine, you know, we ask patients, put that symptom on a rating out of 10, 10 out of 10 being the worst. What was it when you came here? What is it now after taking the remedy? And if they say, look, I've had it 10 out of 10 before, but it was probably a 7 when I came to you, and you say, all right, well, what is it now? Oh, it's about a 3. It's more than 50% improvement.
Yeah, and particularly if it's a central symptom.
Yeah, and then you're aiming to go lower.
That's a problem in itself, though. And this is one of the things to go right back to the original starting point that you made, is that a lot of people, when they qualify, they know all about how to spot Mr. Lycopodium or Miss Pulsatilla and, you know, all these sort of caricatures. But one of the things that we found is that they didn't really know how to repertorise well. And one of the keys of that is that you need to understand what defines a symptom, right? And what defines a really important symptom. Because if you can't sort of say that's an important symptom, well, you're not going to repertorise on it. And then even then, you don't know how to extrapolate, because the way that an important symptom will be delivered to you will not be word perfect to what's in the repertory. So now what you need to do is you need to understand how you can take a step to the left, still get what you want. You know, like we had somebody who was just recently, and there was a bit of an argument with their friendship group, and all their friendship group left, and he was, you know, sort of left bereft and all that kind of stuff. So just knowing that from that point things changed means that, yes, it's a mental, but it's a mental that's worth considering because things change from that point, right? So now what you do, you're not going to look up friendship groups' arguments with, but what you will look up is the things like Forsaken, for example, which incorporates a sense of betrayal, as well as also the fact that you're on your own and you don't want to be. And so that forsakenness now, or the sensation of forsakenness, becomes a really prime rubric because it's a starting point to the pathology that follows.
Yep. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. And so, I mean, that's going back to learning it. And I think that's what our podcast topics just ended up being, is how to learn. Because we've been teaching, you know, you've been in it over 30 years. I'm coming up, I've done 25, I think. We've got a lot of experience, both ourselves in, you know, our own clinical experience, and as teachers, because we've both done the teaching. As authors, like it's kind of challenging to take ideas from something else that is slightly different but kind of the same at the same time, make that clear and give that to somebody in such a way that they can understand it and then utilise it.
Can I just also say, though, I could only do that because of the quality of my undergraduate course. So you know, because it gave me such a good foundation. And so here's a sing out. I mean, it might have sounded like earlier that I was knocking Indian homeopaths, which I'm not, because that's too broad. What I'm sort of saying is those that are just using it as a medicine. So I'm using, sulfur because it's good for eosinophils or something like that, which we have heard, by the way.
Yep.
So I'm not just making that up. I mean, that is just not homeopathic. Now, they will argue to the nth degree that it is. But what you're doing there is that you're trying to use a remedy like sulfur as a stimulant and to create a very specific outcome. And that just misses the point of particularly the concept of a constitutional entirely. But that's just one element of the homeopaths there. Or perhaps around the world, I don't know. But at the same time, I've got more respect for an Indian doctor homeopath that does that than somebody who says, what's your favourite animal? And someone says a dog and they give them laccan because it's clearly their remedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a bit light.
See, that kind of stuff just drives me bananas.
But I'm gonna pull you back to your point, which was your undergraduate training.
Well, this is why I also wanted to point out that the undergraduate training that we had, that was delivered by Denise Carrington Smith. I think she's still alive, but we're going back nearly 40 years now. And she was, I don't know, probably 40, 50
I think she's well in her 80s now, and she's off the beaten track, so we haven't had contact in a while.
But even then, I mean, my other point is then this is because of, this is a sing out to praise of the Indian homeopaths, is that whole course was essentially designed by Subrata Banerjee of what he thought was really important, which he was, I think, the head of the Bengal Allen Institute.
Yeah,
Is that
and
correct?
his either uncle or great uncle had worked with Allen in the late 1800s. So, there was this really strong...
TF or JH?
Good question, don't know. But I remember sitting in the 90s when I went to Calcutta, and he brought out the family kind of encyclopedia with all the notes that I think it was his great uncle had written at that time, and you could open it and have a read. It was really precious, it was really special. But the main thing was, and I remember this going, I think I was only in year one, and I went to a lecture when he was in Melbourne, and somebody asked him quite a good question. What are the books, Dr. Banerjee, that you think we should be studying? And he got out on the whiteboard, or might have been a blackboard then, but whatever, and he wrote a list of these books that he said, you must read these books.
And Denise did the same thing.
And they're all classical, yeah.
She said to him, look, if at its most fundamental bones, what's the skeleton of the best course that you can come up with?
Yep.
All the different books, what are we meant to know from this? And a bit like what you were just talking about, the answer to that question that somebody asked Subrata. Well, Subrata then kind of helped Denise design this
classical course.
4-year course.
That's why it was Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, still is.
And that's what I mean, is that Denise delivered it, but it was Subrata's...
Yeah, on his recommendation.
He was the backbone to it all. And it was an incredible course.
But it was great for you because you could sift through what some of it, I'm going to say, when students say, should I read all those books? I can say yes, if you've got a mind for sifting through the past and then have a mind to cherry pick what's important and what isn't. That's a long time. That's a hard thing. You did it. You read every one of those books. You thought about everything that was written and you saw inconsistencies. I remember you saying to me early on in the 90s one time, what's the difference between Kent and Hahnemann? And I remember thinking, that's a good question. I should know that. Look, I'm only a student. I won't put myself under too much pressure. And I went back and said, you tell me. But, you know, you did.
Because I'd seen lectures where there were pictures of Kent up there and there were pictures of Hahnemann up there and all of these old sort of greats of which we were standing on the shoulders of. But then the lecturers would deliver a lecture quoting Hahnemann here, quoting Kent there, and there's no problem with that. I have no problem with them, you know, quoting all of these giants. But in some aspects, though, Kent was saying something entirely different to Hahnemann. Or someone like Cooper, who was also a huge developer in homeopathy. He, you know, and in fact, he was such a big name that they formed the Cooper Club, if you remember. I was talking, used to deliver that.
That was
lecture.
with Clark, wasn't it?
Clark and Burnett and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, Clark, for example, his dictionary is just an opus. It's incredible. We used to work from it all the time. Okay, it's very antiquated now, but as far as the knowledge goes, if you can get past some of the language, the knowledge is unbelievable. Now, Clark was part of the Cooper Club, as was Burnett.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you sort of sit there and you quote Burnett and you sort of go, well, 50 reasons for being a homeopath and, you know, have him up there in the same sort of league as Kent and all this kind of stuff. But the way that they practiced was so diametrically opposite to each other that you start to wonder, why are they in the same room? I understand that they're both homeopaths. But the only reason they're both homeopaths is because they're using potentized medicines. But the way they're using those potentized medicines is entirely different.
I mean, that's such a fundamental thing. Just because you pop a homeopathic remedy doesn't mean it's homeopathically indicated.
No, it doesn't. And this is the big thing I've got against protocols. Now, I have looked into the CEASE protocol. We made a pact that we don't really want to downplay other people. But I will say that I don't like anything that has a protocol in it because
it's not individual.
Because it's not individualized. No. It's not based on symptom totality. The whole thing about homeopathy is similia similibus curenta. Right, and that is likes, cures, likes, which means that you take the sum total of the symptoms, meaning that your body is trying to restore a balance in a way that your rational mind, as the practitioner, doesn't understand, but they do understand that we better follow it. Otherwise, If we don't follow it, then we're just up in all these hypothetical theories again. So you must follow the symptoms as they're being delivered by the patient's body. Now, the moment you've got a protocol, you're not doing that.
Yeah, because I think it's called, and it's quite fashionable, I believe, predictive homeopathy.
What does that mean?
Well, it means you can predict the next remedy. Well, I've said to students, I can't see that. That seems ridiculous. Homeopathy is reactive. You react to what the body is telling you to do. So you're a reactor, not a predictor.
Well, if that's true, I've never looked into it. I've never even heard of it. But if that's true,
it's not homeopathic.
You don't even know if the first one's worked yet until you give it. I mean, I have given remedies where they are picture perfect.
They don't work.
And they don't
not
work.
Always. Well, sometimes they do, but not always. And that's what I love about HFA. It's been such a nice freedom of the mind to just start by taking the case and just listening, writing down anything that you perceive as a good general, a good modality. You highlight the ones that could be turned into rubrics, so you get to know your repertory reasonably well, which is an important part of your training. Then you repertorise, and anything could come up. It's like a lucky dip. Anything could come up.
Well, it's true. And I've had patients say to me that, we'll just stick with lycopodium because it's in my head. So I'm making this up. It's not actually, factually true right down to the remedy that I chose.
It's an example, yeah.
But what they're doing is that they'll say, I looked up lycopodium after you prescribed it, and it is me to a T. And this is on the follow-up consultation. And I will say to them, well, I didn't choose it for that reason. I'm glad it's you to a T. And I'm glad it explains a lot. If only it had have worked, though. Right? And so you have to change.
Yeah. And even if it does, you didn't take into account their personality when you chose it.
Never.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I'll take into account mentals, like in that example.
Yeah, when it's before. A cause and effect thing. Yeah, of course. So, but it's very freeing because you repertorise in a very simplistic, straightforward manner. It's very objective. The patient has told you they crave this, or this pain hurts at this time or in this position, whatever it might be. You repertorise, and there's 15 or 20 remedies, and then you go to the face, and then you work out the miasm from the facial structure, and the lines and the shapes of shape of their eyes and nose and mouth, etc., their teeth, their chin, their ears, the hairline, the bridge of the nose, all of it. You take all of it into consideration, and then you make up a chart and you work out their dominant miasm. You go back to the graph and you look at the remedies in your totality graph that match the miasm. There's usually only between 1 and 4 there. Then if you want, you can search for one more rubric to see if you can differentiate. We don't do materia medica anymore to differentiate because the rubrics are much more holistic representation of the remedy than the materia medica, which is just a summary of rubrics. All the rubrics are there. And so there's no point, looking, does it say, hungry at 11 a.m. back in the materia medica? Well, if it's come up in the rubric, if it was put in the rubric that particular remedy is hungry at 11 a.m., then it is. The fact that it didn't make it to a materia medica is irrelevant. So repertory is way more important.
So now what you need to do, though, is that there are a lot of patients that are new to all of this. So you just need to define what a rubric is, what a materia medica is, and what a repertory is.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a nice little question. So you've got provings in homeopathy, which is basically where a substance is diluted and energised through a succussion method, which is a dilution and the succussion is the banging and the dilution is the dilution, and they both come together to form a potency. So you've got a diluted substance. It's tested on the healthiest people you can find. They write down all the symptoms that they notice, and that becomes then put into a repertory, which is a via symptom, alphabeticized via parts of the body, great big dictionary in effect. And there's literally thousands and probably well over 1 million different symptoms and the different remedies that show those symptoms in a proving. But of course that was so huge over the years, from the 1800s when they started. They started particularly by, about the 1830s to start writing all this into books and order and so forth, that they just had to simplify it. So they took some of the more, the ones that some of the clinicians had seen more, and these were called keynotes, as if somehow they were special to that remedy, but they're not really. It was a way of remembering them. And then they wrote materia medicas, which is just instead of via the symptoms, which is the repertory, it's via the remedy. So again, usually in alphabet order, all the remedies starting with A all the way through to Z, and their indications, and then they're categorised from usually mind down to skin or extremities with modalities at the end.
They work anatomically from the mind to the head and then down
sort of
the body.
Down the body, through the body. Look, there are different materia medicas that are allocated in different ways, but it doesn't really matter. It's just like a library system to find something. So, if you're particularly interested in lycopodium and the skin, you open up to L, you find lycopodium, you whip down until you get to skin, and then you have a read. Or you can repertorise on what your patient is displaying, which is 5 or 6 or 7 really good symptom indications, particularly modalities, which is their interaction with the environment. And up comes lycopodium and maybe 5, 10 15 other remedies that all also have those indications. Now you have to then filter again, and that's where the miasm comes in, via the face. Now, if you were to get lycopodium as your answer, it would be because the face was dominantly soric or yellow in our HFA speak. And so now you'd say, well, there's lycopodium up the top of my list of 15 remedies, or maybe the fifth one down. But it's there. It's showing for all those rubrics. And the face has indicated the patient is dominantly soric or in the yellow group. I'm going to give lycopodium as my first remedy. The fact that the personality may or may not match, that's just an aside. The reality is there's only personality pictures for certain remedies. A lot of other remedies don't have them. I gave Fossac recently to someone. It really helped a hormone problem they had. And I didn't pick it because of their personality. I picked it because it repertorised on 5 or 6 generals, and their face was dominantly in the brown miasm, and so I gave it, and it worked really, really well. And that's it.
I remember too, I think it was Franz Vermeulen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, we saw Franz in Melbourne in the early 2000s.
Yeah. And I remember we went out to dinner with Franz. And his then wife at the time. And he was talking, in fact, I think his whole lecture, or some of his lecture, ended up being about
it was on provings, wasn't it?
The provings, and how you've got to be really careful, particularly with the mentals, because when you break down who the provers were
from those early provings,
then they were proving there was a commonality that was irrespective of the remedy that was being taken, which Franz was then highlighting to show that this was bringing out aspects of that person.
It belonged to the prover, not the remedy.
Yes, rather than the remedy itself. I remember having a bit of a discussion with him about that. He was a good guy. I'm assuming he's not dead.
No need to go there, Grant.
No. But what I'm saying is that
we haven't spoken with some of these people in a long time.
But Franz is a good guy. I'm assuming he's still going.
It was really interesting, that lecture, because I remember he did the early homeopaths like Hahnemann, and what was the other one starting with S? There's a few of them, the real early German ones. And so he was saying, feels like they're being criticised. Note, it's in 8 different remedy provings that Hahnemann did, and different ones like that.
And one of the ones was a lawsuit too. And the lawsuit it feels as if they're going to be sued, or that they're involved in some sort of lawsuit. And then when they looked at the provers, they found that it all came from the same guy.
Yeah. So you got to be really careful about those sort of what you'd call personality or feelings-based things. And yet they can still be quite real in different circumstances, but better to use them when it's ever since a certain point rather than personality.
It becomes a problem when you start to build a profile.
Yeah, it really does. And in fact, his presentation was so scientifically validating. I remember one homeopath came up to me, and she was actually a teacher, and she said, "Oh my God, it makes me question homeopathy." And you said, "Oh, that's going too far." I mean, homeopathy clearly works, but the reality is he's highlighted a problem. And interestingly, what you came to the same conclusion.
I did, yeah.
It's even earlier than that. Was the real problem was how the mentals are used. That's a real problem.
Yeah, it is a real problem. But the thing, if you're talking about provings and what the provings elicit, I mean, you've got to, again, they talk about, some of these earlier authors talk about mental provings don't come out in the lower potencies. Well, I just don't believe that that's true, because I've done provings in a 6. I've done provings in a 6X, and you still get mentals coming out.
Right.
But one of the things...
But are they coming out because the remedy's aggravating the person's pre-existing state, or is it belonging to the remedy?
Well, you can only know that by the quantity of the provers, right? So if you give Nat Mur to somebody or a group of people, and let's just say 30 people and 10 of them start having dreams that they've committed a crime of some form.
Then that belongs to the remedy.
Yes, it belongs to the remedy.
So you've got to see it across.
One of them does.
Yeah, could be them.
And this was the importance, remember, ages ago, we had a discussion about the importance of ranking the different rubrics of 1, 2, 3, or in Bonninghausen's case, 1 to 5, and not just being subjectively saying. Now, I'm going to actually go out to Fatulkas here because it's in his book where he sort of says, I've seen a lot of phosphorus people crave oranges.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned this before.
As a 3. And I was absolutely shocked by that because he should know better than that. He does know better than that. It's not arbitrary based on the person who's delivering the lecture as to whether it should be a 3, 2, or 1. 3 are meant to be proven, reproven, and clinically verified. And by clinically verified doesn't mean just by one person.
Multiple times.
And it's meant to be proven and reproven.
Yeah.
Right? That's the reliability of doing a numerical system, that some of them are stronger rubrics than others when it comes. Yeah, anyway. So I was going to go somewhere with that, but I got my temper up.
I feel like this has been a very kind of emotionally charged podcast. I think this is a topic that we've over the years, you have uncovered so much, you've tested so much, it's worked, and we haven't always had the validation we would have liked. And I think we're quite passionate about the fact that we just want to get this methodology out to students.
Well, I'm passionate about homeopathy and I'm passionate about making it work, and I'm extraordinarily passionate in a negative way of anyone who stands in the way of that by stupid bloody theories that don't work.
Oh, that's fair enough. Absolutely fair. I reckon.
Let's go on. We'll go on with this maybe next week.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. See you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.